Good morning. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note any website or email that I mention will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business licensing assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center at City Hall or call 312-74-GO-BIZ. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn about the program, please visit chicago.gov/businesseducation. I will post the mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that the views, information, and opinions expressed during this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection or the City of Chicago. Today's webinar will be HR for Entrepreneurs, What You Must Know If You Are a Title Department, presented by Audia Wells, Greater Englewood CDC. Audia?
Thank you so much. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Friday to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. Again, my name is Audia Wells, and I am with the Greater Englewood Community Development Corporation, and we are a small business development center in Englewood on 63rd and Halsted. So we hope you come by and visit with us. Our goal today is to share the important aspects of human resources with you as entrepreneurs, small business owners. As we help build the capacity of small business owners, we also develop the local workforce. And so we want to make sure that our small businesses have the tools that they need to be the best employers. And so we'll jump right in and start talking about how human resources affects small business and what you need, to know in order to be a solid employer and be in compliance with the employment laws federally and locally. And so we'll be sharing some of these things to help you manage your employee resources. So in Illinois, in most other federal laws, some federal laws as well, one employee makes you an employer. And so whether that be yourself or another person, we want to ensure that you are safeguarded and you are looking at the things that you need to look at in order to hire the best individuals and build your human resources to protect yourself and to protect your employees. So there are 5 areas of the entrepreneurial process. As you already know, there's the discovery and understanding what you want to offer in terms of services and products, concept development, how you're going to bring that to market, who's your target audience, how are you going to get the resources needed to build your business, so the resourcing aspect of it. What other pieces will you need in your business to develop and grow? And then the actualization, that's the implementation part of actually doing the business, running the business, and then you have the harvesting. And so that's the reaping of the benefits of being a small business owner, entrepreneur. What comes after that? So after all of these steps, you look at where does HR fit in these steps, and they really belong in all of them. And so a lot of times entrepreneurs are so focused on building the business, but really the product thing. So whatever the product or the service that you're trying to get to market, that can take up a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of thought. But there's so many other pieces to think about human resources from the very beginning, so you know how to build out your organization. You can plan for staffing, how many people you're going to need, what type of people you're going to need, what are the laws around that, benefits, performance. How do you keep staff engaged? How do you keep them providing customer service and to also build your business? So there's all along this spectrum, we're looking at what human resources does to help grow our business. And feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat. We'll be having those monitored throughout, so you can ask questions throughout the webinar as well as at the end. So human resources, again, we don't always know all the things that have to do with human resources because we're so focused on the task at hand, the business, the product, the service. And so again, as we think about those 5 aspects of the entrepreneur life cycle, we're thinking about where the company is going and what it will look like. So you might start out with a staff of 1, you may want to grow it to a staff of 5 later on. Again, so we're looking at what is our business going to do in the first 2 to 5 years. That may have some implications on how many employees you have, what the laws are that affects the number of employees you have, and things like that. So we want to have a big picture idea of where our business is going. That will automatically be part of our business plan if we have that. Also, enlisting the right people to work in the company. So what does that mean? Sometimes we have to lean on family and friends, but eventually we want to be able to get the right people with the right skill set, fit in our culture, all of those things that make them the right people to work in our companies. We will also want people to be empowered. We want to build people's skills. We want to also have them build our company with their skills. And so giving them the right information, the right authorities, the right level of authority for their role, so that our company can produce quality products and services. We also want to evaluate performance. Sometimes we don't adequately evaluate the performance and communicate performance challenges, and we just kind of recycle employees. We might hire, terminate. We spend a lot of time on performance, offboarding and onboarding and recruitment without participating in the performance process, helping people understand where there are challenges, addressing those challenges with them in a timely manner, and then moving forward, giving them a chance to improve and grow and develop. And so we want to spend a little more time there versus the revolving door that can sometimes happen. Again, we're in the business of also encouraging. We do that through training, recognition, rewards. Everyone likes to be recognized in some type of way. Part of this recognition is understanding what's important to people that work for you. So understanding what's more meaningful. Some people are driven by money. Some people are driven by acknowledgement and accolades. So just really understanding your workforce. But these aspects of training, recognition, rewards, they're very important in the workplace. And that's part of your human resource strategy. And then we want to look at our assumptions, our expectations, as we create a culture that's going to produce results. So if you look at some of the larger brands that we know and recognize, there are some things that stand out. They're not new or particularly different, such as customer service. You can look at Nordstrom's, they're known for their customer service. Of course, there are exceptions, but they're known for their customer service, their ability to give refunds. You don't have any problems returning things with them. There is a culture that they've created that gives employees the autonomy and the authority to take care of individual customer needs. Same thing with Southwest and other companies. And so they have created a culture giving people the necessary accesses in order to take care of their customers. So however we design our culture, part of that is actually human resources. We use human resources to do those things. Do we have comments in the chat, questions in the chat?
We are good for right now.
Okay, great. So what is HR anyway? What does it include? So human resources include your strategic planning. That's also known as human resource planning if you're specifically talking about how employees fit in the organization, what roles are required, what levels of roles are required, recruitment and selection, so hiring, sourcing, interviewing, and picking the right people for the organization and for the role that you're hiring for. Then there's compensation and benefits, establishing pay ranges for, appropriate for the market, appropriate for the job, performance appraisals. How are you going to measure forward goals as well as looking back at work? What that means in terms of compensation, having exceeded goals. So a lot of that has to be planned out so that there's no disparate treatment and compensation. Then you have training and development. That's any resources used to help people understand their role, the culture, help them professionally or personally develop in the organization. Then there's employee relations, how to keep people engaged, how to keep them wanting to work for your organization. Because again, different things drive different people. It could be money, it could be the flexibility that they have with the work-life balance, could be the schedule, could be the location of the job in terms of proximity to where they live. And then there's safety and health. So all of your OSHA regulations, your benefits, any of those infectious diseases. We just came out of a 3-year, still uncertain situation with infectious diseases, and how do we get back to work and what's our new normal, and developing policies and procedures so that people can maintain safety and health in your workplace. So it's really a lot of things that sometimes people only pick out. HR is recruitment and selection, and maybe, recruitment and selection is what I get the most, but it really is so much more and encompasses the whole organization and affects the whole organization. So it is a supporting function, but a critical function for employers. So the top areas for small businesses: hiring the right people, deciding what to pay people and how to pay people, knowing what HR laws apply. Then there's communication between employer-employee, communication between employee-employee, and then terminating employees. What happens when you let them go? So let's start with the job descriptions. When we're talking about looking at the correct people to fit our organization, we want to look at the job title, the job summary, essential functions, non-essential functions, and then any specific job needs or demands, working conditions. So the job title is very important because you could easily overinflate someone's position. So we get titles like coordinator, director, manager, COO. So we look at all of these chief and executive roles. We want to make everybody a director, but we have to look at what the qualifications are for that level of job title. because along with the job title comes the corresponding salary as well as the job duties. So if a duty has something like largely administrative tasks, you wouldn't make that person a manager if they're not managing people, or you wouldn't make them a director even if they're managing people, but they're not directing the activities, meaning part of your strategy, they're creating the conceptual processes that run the business. It's a much higher level than a lot of people expect or assume. And so with that comes the salary along with it, and then the matching or corresponding job duties and skill sets. So we want to make sure that all of those things align with the job title, the job summary, and then essential functions. So the essential functions are the things that we spend the majority of time doing. So if I'm a human resource director, my essential functions will be to create compensation structures, to manage and oversee the benefit function, and work with brokers and develop training and development plans for the organization and opportunities for employees to grow. So I would manage and direct all of those things, but I also have some non-essential functions. So it might be answering employee questions. It might be training managers. It might be giving them advice on how to handle particular situations and things of that nature. So I have some main functions. I have some not so main functions, but required functions. And then you have your job specifications, which are going to be any certifications, educational requirements. So a lot of times we'll see bachelor's degree required. Is it really required to do the job? Sometimes that's used as a weed out mechanism for employees, but you have to see if that's really a requirement. Is a master's degree really required? Is a certification sufficient in its place? What are the physical demands? So oftentimes I see people who will hire folks, but then the employee will come back and say, well, I didn't know I had to lift this much, or I didn't know I had to stand this much, or I didn't know that I had to move around this much for this role. And it's probably because they didn't see a job description where these things were outlined. And so we want to make sure that our job descriptions outlined any physical demands on a person, because we don't know what people's abilities are. But if they can do the job and it's outlined there, then we've properly set the expectation for that role. If their mental demands, their ability to answer a lot of questions, interact with a lot of people, move around a lot, do a lot of maybe isolated work. So these are things that we want to let people know, hey, this is the function of this job and this is what it looks like. Can you fulfill the duties of this job? And so that's what it would be. Working conditions, also very important. We don't want to assume that people understand the full scope of the job. So the more we put in the job description, the closer we'll get to having the right type of people apply for the job. So we want to make sure that all of those things are included in our job descriptions. I see some questions in the Q&A.
One just kind do you recommend a software or a payroll, a HR specialist?
Do I recommend a
software for payroll?
I don't have any recommendations. There are a lot out there. It depends on the size of the organization and the organization's needs. So something as simple as like a bamboo HR, or something as more complicated for larger organizations like ADP. Some people prefer more well-known brands. Some people kind of like the ease of some of the more simple systems that they can go in and use. So it really depends on the preference, on your preference. But there's Bamboo HR, there's Bambi HR, there's ADP, there's Gusto, there's a lot of companies out there. It just depends on what your preference is and your price.
Good point.
Price is
Another-
important.
Exactly. Another question, they're asking if you will be willing to share these slides with the attendees.
Yes.
Okay, so we will have a follow-up email with the slides. Someone else mentioned Jazz HR.
Yeah, Jazz HR is one.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's really about preference. Most of them do the same things. In addition to providing a HRIS system, which is a HR information system, so you can have all of your employee files online or electronically, so you don't have to keep paper. That is the best if you don't have a separate place, and we'll talk a little bit about file maintenance. But an HRIS system is really good to have so that you can store your files electronically. They're a lot safer and easier to access. So you definitely want to consider that.
Great. Another question. How detailed the job descriptions need to be? Sometimes they're out of sudden activities employees need to perform to help the business and that are not listed. Awesome
question. So I say that here you see that the job descriptions should be ADA and ADAA compliant. And this is kind of a hard slide to read, but it really should be as specific as possible. You don't want to take anything for granted that people understand. I literally had an interview, I want to say it has to be at least 6 months ago, with a person who said they could do the job. I described the environment. It was in the job description as well. They could not walk up a flight of stairs. And that was something that was in the job description as a requirement because that's where the building was and there was no elevator. And we went over it several times and not once until they showed up was it ever a problem. They never wanted to just close that. And so we had to, revoke the offer because we had clearly stated it. We discussed it. We asked them if they could do the demands of the job, which included getting to the workspace, and they could not. And so the thing that helped us in that instance was having this ADA wording included in our job description to be able to manage that situation appropriately. So as clearly as you can state it, you want those things in there. And we understand that tasks will come up that are not always outlined in the job description, to your point, but as much as possible based on, all of your business needs, then, we try to do the best we can. Otherwise, if we feel like it's too much of a stretch, we might want to bring in an outside contractor to take care of that task if we can.
Great. Last question, and then I think you could move on. Okay. Any recommendations to do a successful recruitment in a small business?
A successful recruitment in a small business? Again, I think it depends on the time that you have available, number one, because recruitment takes a lot of time. So you may, if you can do it and you have the time and the money, money is also a consideration because these job boards can cost, $300 to $500 a month. They can cost a price per resume, depending, I think that's how LinkedIn does it. They charge you by the resume that you receive. So that can get pretty pricey. So you want to be able to identify your budget first off, and then the level of job that you're recruiting for. So more senior or more professional, more niche roles will probably do well in LinkedIn. Your lower level staff roles might do better on Indeed. So again, there are lots of job boards out there. There's ZipRecruiter. A lot of I think someone said Jazz HR, they have a database of resumes that you can purchase a membership to scour the resumes, in both Indeed, both LinkedIn, Jazz HR, all of them, Monster Career Builder. But you have to pay. So looking at your budget, Indeed does things for free. Even people have done Craigslist still. Those are free postings, and you get some decent resumes. You get some not applicable ones as well, but you will come up with some decent resumes and some strong resumes in many instances, depending on your job posting. So I would also recommend behavioral description interviewing, which looks at having people describe when they have done certain tasks before. So the best indicator of future success is past success. If they've done it successfully before, chances are they'll do it successfully again. And then if they haven't, they'll say, well, if I was in that situation, I would. That means that they haven't done it. So using behavioral interviews really is helpful in hearing about people's experiences or lack thereof. And so those are some things that I would consider in crafting a recruitment plan, looking at where I want these candidates to come from. If there's a specific place that I'm looking for, like an area, do I want them in the area where my business is? Am I willing to expand? Also, what skills they need to have. Do they need to have language skills? Do they need to have accounting skills? So based on the skills, I would also reach out to maybe some of the professional organizations. They're usually entry level to senior level people in these organizations that are looking for their first or their 10th job. So it just depends on what you're looking for, but I would definitely take that into consideration so that you can network, but also find people who are interested and dedicated to a particular career, if you have those needs, and then be looking at people who have worked at companies that exemplify where you want to go in your business. So if you're looking for great customer service, you might have some companies in mind that have good customer service. If you're looking for people who have had great service, you're looking at those, like food service, for example, you look at those people in their resumes to say, okay, they've worked at similar organizations before. They have this level of experience. I'm interested in speaking to them. So those are just some helpful things to build out your recruitment plan.
Great, thank you. There's about 3 or 4 more questions that came in. Do you want to take them or do you want to continue? We could answer them at the
Let's
end.
take them. Let's take them.
Oh, let's see. Certain industries may have specific requirements for how employees should be compensated, the types of activities, when they should be compensated, how, etc. What steps should small businesses take to ensure they know the compensation laws and standards for their industry and are compensating their employees fairly and appropriately?
Awesome. We're going to move into that. You want to tell me what the other questions are?
Sure. Where do we find ADA, ADAA compliance information?
Gotcha. So that slide that I just shared, you will have, and that's a great starting point. And the Department of Labor.
Perfect. And the ADA issue about the stairs that you just described, How specific do you need to be in the interview so you don't get in trouble on this?
So in the job description, we had ability to climb stairs. It was just that simple. Because we knew that they would have to be able to climb them. There was no other way to get to the second floor. So we literally put in ability to climb stairs, and they did not have that ability. So they never should have continued with the process, or they should have asked about any accommodations that should have been made, and which we could have shared with them. We didn't own the building, so we couldn't make major improvements to it, like putting in an elevator or anything like that. So something as simple as that in terms of the physical requirements was already in our job description. It's really on the applicant or candidate to disclose that they may need accommodation. We can't
Great.
ask, they have to disclose.
Okay, great. Where can we access some of the personality tests? I believe I'm describing it correctly. I've taken some tests on Indeed and they rank me as reliable, etc.
So Indeed does have a function where if the employer is aware, as an employer, you can bring those tests in through Indeed. You can ask questions, you can have them take certain little tests. All you have to do is click the buttons for them to do so. If you're looking at something more extensive like a DISC or a Myers-Briggs, there are a couple of there's a couple of free tests, brief tests that you can use, but those are much more pricey to get those communication style tests done. So I would stick to something a little less expensive, like using the tests that are like in an Indeed or something like that that comes with the recruitment package that you buy.
Great, thank you. I think we are good for questions. There you go.
Awesome. And so as we talk about how to pay employees, we're looking at some federal tests, and they fall under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So you might hear FLSA a lot. That's what it's referring to. So you have two types of employees, the exempt employees versus the non-exempt employees. And this is just a simple diagram, but your exempt employees for 90% of the time are paid on a salary basis. Your non-exempt employees are hourly employees, but as you see, some in a small instance can be salaried. But for the most part, your non-exempt means hourly. They're not exempt from overtime is what that stands for. In the wages, exempt employees, in order for you to have an exempt level salary, it has to meet this minimum requirement, $35,568 or $684 per week. For the non-exempt, they have to be paid at least the federal minimum wage. Now in Chicago, the city wage is a lot higher than the federal minimum wage. And so you have to meet the highest standard wherever you are. So if you're in the city of Chicago, your higher standard is going to be met versus if you are an employer in Joliet or Matson or Orland Park. So the city, whatever is the most advantageous to the employee based on where you are and where the work is being done, that's the wage that you pay. The job positions for exempt employees are usually a higher level of responsibility that actually affect the company's operations. And then non-exempt usually are the non-managerial positions. So the areas where I see are the most maybe complicated are these administrative assistants. People just want to pay them, $50,000 or $40,000 in a salary, but they may not be making the decisions, have the autonomy, and affect the company's operations in a way that would be an exempt employee. And a lot of times they really, they really are non-exempt, non-exempt employees. And so we have to be very careful to look at, and there are tests on the IRS website that we can go on the line and say, oh, is this person a exempt or non-exempt based on the criteria that they put? And it takes a little bit of time to look at the jobs and what you want them to do, what you need them to do, what skills they need, how much autonomy you're going to give them, as well as, how it fits in the whole ecosystem. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Did we have any more questions about pay come in? Because the next one, we're going to talk about employee versus independent.
No, you're good.
Okay. So there's a 10 and a 20-point test that helps people determine whether they should pay someone as an independent contractor or as an employee. And so as we see in these two columns, you have an employee or intern. They work exclusively for the company. The company provides the tools, they control when and where the work is done. They set working hours. The worker actually has to be the one to perform the work. They have benefits, they get some type of vacation. The company pays for any work-related expenses, and they're hourly or salaried, and the company is responsible for paying their employee taxes and withholding certain taxes as well. Now, with the independent contractors, they can work for other companies. The worker provides their own tools. So a lot of times you'll see a company pay for or give to an employee or an independent contractor, rather, a laptop. Really, an independent contractor should have their own laptop. They shouldn't be providing major tools for them to do the work. The worker gets to decide how the work is completed. They generally can set their own working hours. They can hire someone else to do the job. They don't get benefits. They get no vacation or anything like that. They pay their own expenses, and they're paid by the job on a predetermined basis. So I'll see people that say, well, I'm going to hire this program manager as an independent contractor, but they have to work on site. They have to work on dedicated hours. They are provided laptops. They have to do the work. I was like, everything about this says independent contractor, or it says employee, but you're treating them as an independent contractor. And that's where you can get dinged because you've misclassified the worker. You're managing them as an employee, but you're not paying the taxes by identifying them as an independent contractor. And because benefits can be expensive, PTO can be expensive, but there's no requirement to provide benefits or PTO. So you don't have to provide those things as an employer. It does make it make you more attractive to work for. But if you're bringing people on as independent contractors anyway, but they look like employees, the risk is much greater for the employer to be dinged if the relationship goes bad and they say, well, I was never paid properly, and you're reported. So you want to definitely be in compliance and review how you're bringing employees on versus independent contractors. Any questions around that?
There is one.
Okay.
As a human resource department, can we make regular trainings available throughout the year for employees to improve performance? How can we ensure that these trainings are in compliance with state and regulations and company mission and operations?
That's a great question. So I guess I'd have to ask what type of trainings you're thinking about asking. So for example, sexual harassment training is required by every company, every employer, at least once a year. And so if I were delivering that, I would use as a template for training the Illinois state training that is provided for all employers, just so that I could be in compliance with that. And you can modify those things to tailor to your particular organization in terms of giving examples, so it becomes real to the employees. But there is a training provided by the state, Illinois Department of Human Resources. They have trainings online that are free. So sometimes people will just have other folks, consultants maybe deliver those trainings and tailor them to fit their organization, their examples, again, so that it hits home and makes sense to the employees. But it would just be a simple conversation. How long is this training going to be? What goals do you hope to achieve by the training? And then have that person design whatever training that is that, you know, meets the goals that you're trying to achieve for the organization. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Next question. It states the independent contractor can work for other companies. I recently worked as an independent contractor, and the agreement prevented me from working for another company in that industry for 2 years. Is that legal?
So I am not an attorney, but the non-competes are very difficult to uphold in court if that is your sole means of providing for yourself and that is your only profession. I know that it is common for people to provide non-disclosure agreements and non-compete agreements. The fundamentals of why they even ask you to sign it is so that you don't steal their information, their processes, and their customers. And so you'd have to contact an attorney to see about the legality of what your specific contract states. But in general, you can't stop me from doing HR because I do HR and that's all I do. You can't stop me from working or earning a living by saying I can't do HR for anybody else for 2 years. It's not supportable. But I would definitely have an attorney review your contract so you know what your limitations are and can adequately decipher any language in there that's unclear for you.
Great, thank you. Next one. How do we find what is required for training and education?
Training and education on what?
Does not expand. If they want to, please add to the chat. We can go to the next question.
Okay.
Are these practices required for nonprofit organizations that use employees and contractors?
Yes. So nonprofits are employers and they have to follow the same Fair Labor Standards Act as everyone else.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions right now.
Okay. So again, we're going to talk about the importance of properly classifying workers. So as supervisors, hiring managers, we want to make sure that we're classifying workers correctly because of the taxes, any benefit plans for the employer. So whether it's everything from PTO to 401k plans, and then we also want to be mindful of employment laws so that we can prevent the civil lawsuits that people bring to us, because the moment a person doesn't get paid appropriately, they're going to go to an outside agency before they try to work it out with you in many instances, depending on how the conversation goes. And so you don't want any of that because it can be expensive to fight. So we have some different types of contingent workers, which are your part-time, full-time, but they're temporary workers. So you have leased employees. Those are people who might come through a PEO or a professional employer organization or a leasing firm. And they are employees of that company that come and work for you. So the real employer is that PEO, but they do the work at your site. And so that releases some of the liability in terms of taxes and all of those things from you. and it rests with the company that you lease the employee from. Same thing with temporary staffing agencies. The rate is a little bit higher because they absorb the risk as being the employer. They absorb the cost of, paying the taxes and anything else that they provide for the employee. But you get to tell them how to do the work, what work to do, etc. So those are the type of temporary employees. Then you have unpaid interns. The intern designation, it has been kind of loosey-goosey, but it really is a student receiving some college credit for participating in an established program. And so we want to make sure that we're not using interns just for the free labor, but that they are benefiting from training from the employer for this work opportunity that they've provided for the student. And then you have independent contractors. You may contract someone on a temporary basis to fulfill some of the work that you need to do, but it's a very specific time frame, a specific agreement. You cannot control necessarily the work by how they get it done. You just may have to get the deliverable that you want. And so there's some changes, as we talked about previously, in terms of how that work is directed versus how it's received. You want to make sure that in the independent contractor agreement that the work is outlined in terms of what you want, when you want it, what format you want it in, et cetera. And that's pretty much all you get to say to an independent contractor. Do we have any questions in the chat on that?
A few. Is there a state of Illinois free training program for HR for small business owners?
There is a training from the IDHR on human resources. I don't know if it's a full program. I know they have it on discrimination. I don't know the full training, but I would check with IDHR on that to see. They should have all their trainings on their website.
Great. This is a follow-up question from before.
Mhm.
Just general education. For example, you mentioned everyone must take a sexual harassment course. So just wanted to know, as an employer, what I should be providing for education during the onboarding process.
So if it's sexual harassment and discrimination, IDHR has a training that is free on their website. And I think that you can go and sit through it in person as well. Again, I would check their website. In terms of onboarding, you create your own process for onboarding. There's no laws on onboarding, except that you have to have certain paperwork completed on their first day, and that's their employment eligibility paperwork, their I-9 paperwork, in any tax form, so that you can get them in payroll. Everything else is pretty much extra and doesn't have to be completed on their first day. So I would check IDHR for discrimination and harassment training, because I know for sure that they provide that, and then see if they have other offerings for free that you can register.
Great. Another one, if an employer promises benefits insurance and don't provide any benefits within 90 days as stated in the onboarding, are they in violation?
No, employers do not have to offer benefits at all. And so is it unethical? Yes. Is it illegal? No. So you never want to communicate that you're going to offer benefits. You can always say you're looking into it, but you never want to promise that you're going to do benefits until you actually sign the contract with the provider to offer benefits. And sometimes it's a collaborative conversation where you're asking employees kind of what they want, whether it's a HMO, PPO, and then work with your provider or your broker to figure out what makes the most sense budget-wise, how much you're going to contribute, because I think you have to contribute at least 40% to the premium every month. And so you have to look at your budget to be able to do that. But until you do all those things, I definitely would not promise benefits, even though it's not required by law that you provide them.
Okay, great. You don't have to offer benefits even after 50+ employees?
You don't have to offer benefits.
Is HIPAA training mandated by ADA during onboarding?
ADA training is not required at all. These are things that I guess maybe we just should know. They're very hard to know, but there are no laws requiring training unless you're in the medical field. That's just where the risk gets a lot higher in terms of communicating HIPAA-related information. But for employers and employees that are outside of the medical field, there's no requirement around HIPAA training. It just makes sense if you're dealing with medical information.
Great, that's all the questions I see for right now.
Okay. So every organization, if it has one employee, has to have their labor law posters up. And so whether you are in person or virtual, they have formats electronically where you can order the electronic links and send those out to your remote employees or offsite employees. But you should also have physical posters up where employees might convene. Again, it's if you even have one employee. And these big posters, they cover many of the individual postings. So for each state, you can easily go to whatever employment association. Ours is IDES. So you'd go to IDES and you can pull down posters, but it's easier to just buy one for $40 or whatever the cost is, so that you know you have all of the latest. And the companies that you purchase them from, they will usually send you updates if the law has changed in the middle of the year. So that way you know that you're covered. But it usually has the minimum wage, your employee rights in terms of safety, COBRA, USERA. So a lot of the federal laws will be included in these posters, and then they will also find out what state you're in and give you the state posters as well. So if you operate in a combination of states, so you might be located in Illinois, but you have employees in Indiana, you want to get the Indiana laws as well. So again, these posters come out from OSHA. It's good to have them posted as we still deal with infectious diseases all the time, everything from the flu to whatever. So you want to have just a general safety poster or communication from OSHA. OSHA gives a very basic one to give reminders about the surfaces. And as people still work a hybrid schedule maybe, or still working where they're having to come into the office, we want to make sure to reduce the risk of exposure by following some of these basic steps continuously. So when we talk about written personnel policies and their approval processes, these are a lot of the things that we deal with on a daily basis to manage the workflow, to manage employees, et cetera. So we definitely want to have an employee handbook that covers some of the basic, how do we want to work, who we are, what the culture is you want to establish. A lot of that is done through the employee handbook. It outlines things like your time away from work. A lot of the time away from work policies could be optional, and then there are some that are required. So the city of Chicago has quite a few that are required. And so we put those in the handbook so that people can refer to them. Simple things, even as time away for work for voting, military duty, election judges duty, all of these kinds of things can be included in there just in case there's an instance where people need to be away from work. They have certain rights that allow them to do that. So we want to include those things in there. And then you have your performance reviews, some type of language that lets people know that there's a process in place, and you should have a process in place where you're communicating what's expected of that employee and how they can get to the next level, if there is a next level, or how they can have some type of increase that they're shooting for in terms of compensation. So some goals in place for performance and recognition of that performance, or the lack thereof, and what happens next in terms of developing or potentially losing your job. Some basic operational things like expense reports, reimbursements, anything having to do with payroll or a change in or anything that's affecting their pay, you want to also have outlined. Simple things such as office visits, if you are a open door organization where people are coming in and out, how that time is used, where those people are, if people are allowed to come in and visit with staff or come into staff. You want to make sure that people understand how your workspace is to be respected. Then job descriptions, of course, don't have to go in the employee handbook, but this is a written kind of policy in terms of how you do your job, what's expected of you in that role, what level, who you report to, sometimes the pay salary or pay grade that's attached to it, and then you have any departmental processes. So outside of the employee handbook, you may have some standard operating procedures that go into detail about payroll or about expense reports, or something that tells who gets to approve them, who are they sent to, the dates that they're due, when they'll be paid out, like your payroll calendar, for example, things of that nature. But then any policies, you also want to mention how you're going to service clients, your interaction with other departments or other functions, how the departments will work together. So all of these things, it would be helpful for both the employee and the employer to have these written so that you can refer to them when challenges come up, because they will come up. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Where do we get the labor law posters? I need to send via email.
So you can get, I think Jay Keller is a popular one. But yeah, quick Google search for labor law posters and you'll come up with a host of people. I've used Keller in the past, so they're pretty reasonable and responsive.
Great, that's all the questions for right now.
Okay. So we have sexual harassment and discrimination. We want to make sure that we do the training every year if we have any employees. Basically going through what it is, the definitions, describing behaviors, describing what the process is to report sexual harassment or discrimination, explaining what the process is for investigation and what happens after it's reported, and then how it's resolved, as well as a no retaliation policy, and then a whistleblower policy. So it's good to have those things in your handbook so people feel safer, knowing that they understand the process of what will happen if they speak up, and then what the process will be to handle said situation, and then be comforted to know that there's no retaliation, because there are laws that cover that as well. So want to make sure that people understand what sexual harassment and discrimination entails and how your company promises to deal with it. So again, helping them understand what sexual and non-sexual harassment looks like. So just a very basic overview of things that you would cover in a typical training. But again, also the process that you will use to handle any reporting of said harassment in your workplace, either by your employees, your vendors, your customers. Right now, they've expanded sexual harassment to include pretty much everyone. And so that means that every instance needs to be investigated. Any questions about that?
When does the new updated Chicago sexual harassment training need to be completed by? The additional bystanders and manager trainings.
That I don't know. I'd have to look that up. Whenever you do the first training, it's you have exactly 12 months, but I don't know the answer to the second part in terms of the bystander. Because if you pull up the IDHR's training, it's included in there.
Great. In my business, it was a verbal argument between two employees within the workplace work hours. And now one of them claims feeling unsafe at work. Any advice to handle this issue successfully as an HR department?
So let me make sure I heard that right. Two people had an argument offsite, but they worked together.
It doesn't specify, it just says in my business, it was a verbal argument between two employees within the workplace / work hours. So maybe it happened there. Yes, they work together. Did it happen on site at work? I guess the question is, right?
Okay. And so that's a tricky one, because if it wasn't on site and you didn't, there were no witnesses for you to interview, but because it was during work hours or on work site, that makes it a little more complicated, because you can't really go and interview people outside of the workspace that didn't, have anything to do with it. But I'm trying to think if I have had an occasion to actually do that. I'm sorry, I had to think. It wasn't ideal, but I actually did have conversations with people for incident that happened offsite, mainly because the company was concerned that the person had put it on their social media what happened. And so they did come forward in terms of being witnesses so that they could clear the matter up. But generally, if it doesn't happen at your workplace, it can be a little dangerous to go out and start investigating things off-site.
Sorry to interrupt, but the verbal fight happened inside the workplace.
So both of them could have been fired immediately. You have in your policies usually something about workplace violence, and depending on your stance on it, it's discipline up to and including termination. So you can sit both of them down and discuss what happened, either together or independently, depending on the climate with each individual, and try to resolve it there. But if there is no resolution, you can move to termination, because zero tolerance of workplace violence is acceptable reason for termination. But I would try to work it out unless you didn't see any resolve, depending on the people and what you know about them.
Great, thank you. Another question, can an employer search through a candidate's social media postings before making a hiring decision as part of the background check process?
Yes. People don't like it, but that's what happens. In addition to the person that they present to us in an interview, you can tell a lot about a person's decision-making through their social media if it's open. Some people close their social media, and so you don't have anything to review, and some people leave it open, and they may not be the same person that they presented. And I know that there is an argument that what I do off-site on my personal life is my personal business, but it's a difficult call to really trust that someone is so completely different in their personal life that that person is never going to step foot into the workplace. And so it's a legal thing to do. There's no laws preventing that check. Now, you still can't discriminate having found that information out, but you can do it.
Okay, great. Please clarify the intellectual rights of documents or creative work done by employees.
Creative rights. Okay. Again, I am not an attorney. Usually your non-compete and non-disclosure agreements have something in there that prohibit the ability to take what you've learned and the information that you've gleaned to another organization or to use for personal use. If you are an employee, you are getting paid under the work for hire. So everything that you create for that employer, being paid by that employer, belongs to that employer. Everything that you create outside of that, when you're not employed by them or hired for a particular job, then that belongs to you. But that will be hard to prove while you're employed. But they are paying you to create or do whatever it is that you do for them. And so that would be a really tough thing to battle, because there is that work for hire clause in the non-disclosure. So again, that's something that you would have to consult with an attorney in terms of what your intellectual property is for yourself versus the intellectual property for the employer and how it can be used so that you can have a plan going forward and not get crossed up in any of that, those legalities.
Great, that's all the questions right now.
Okay, so we have record retention and destruction. You want to make sure that you have a process for maintaining and purging files. So there's a whole laundry list of requirements around maintaining employee files, either terminated employees and current employees. You can't purge certain files. Some are 3 years all the way up to 5 years that you have to maintain, as well as applicant and candidate, like interview papers, resumes, things of that nature. You also have to maintain for a certain amount of time. You need to have them locked in an inaccessible location. So sometimes we don't have inaccessible locations in our small businesses, but we do have file cabinets that we can lock and keys that we can put away so that people can't just access this confidential information. If you have the electronic files, you want to make sure you have a good backup system. And so that's why the HRIS is a really good idea, because you're basically paying for the backup and maintenance of those systems and files. And so you want to engage in something like that versus keeping them on the cloud with you. If it gets hacked, then it's your fault. And there's all kinds of ramifications for that. And then again, it includes hiring records, which means your resumes, any drug testing, background checks. They also have to be separately maintained for a period of time. And so you want to make sure that you have a process for record retention and then the destruction of those records after the years have passed for you to be able to destroy them. So in your employee files, you want to make sure that managers have access. The manager of the employee has access, not other managers, but the direct supervisor or manager. You want to ensure that there's no surprises in the employee file, no opinions, personal notes, nothing like that that may that's discoverable in court should you ever go to court over that employee. You don't want any of those things. You just want the facts, their applications, their tax withholding forms that they sign, any performance forms that they sign, anything with their signature you want in there, but no notes about anything, no doctor's notes in there that says, they really weren't there. I saw them at the fair, things like that. We want to keep all of that clear. There should be a history of the employment relationship from hire to termination. And then your medical files should be separate from the employee file, and only HR should be able to access the medical files. And so that might be any FMLA paperwork or related paperwork to any kind of leaves, such as pregnancy leaves or anything like that. Physician's notes, correspondence, recommendations, any excuse notes to cover absenteeism or tardiness or anything like that. And then any medical job restrictions, and then any workers' comp. You want to keep all of those in a separate employee file so that those things cannot be accessed by managers for their regular employment file. And then we have the termination. So we want to be able to issue the last paycheck. It can be done on the last day of employment, or it can be done on the next regularly scheduled payroll run. So you don't have to run a separate payroll in order to pay out a last check. You can correlate the last day with the payroll cycle, or you can just term and have that come as part of the regular payroll cycle. You're not required to give severance pay, but if you do, you want to include that as well into the last paycheck. You want to make sure that you have a way to retrieve business property. You cannot withhold any portion of the final check because they owe you anything like a uniform, a laptop, or anything like that, unless you have a prior agreement that you can do so, which is signed by the employee. So it might be something to consider as part of new hire paperwork, that upon termination, if certain assets are not returned, that they will be deducted from the final paycheck, and then the person signs it. Then it's okay to deduct whatever the value of said item is from the final paycheck. But if you do not have that signature, you cannot withhold. And so that's why some people give severance, so they can get their assets back. If you qualify for COBRA, Illinois State, I believe, is always needs to offer COBRA. So you would provide the option for them to stay on your medical benefits while they pay 100% of the premium. So you no longer have to contribute after termination. They can pay the full amount if they so choose to maintain their benefits on their own through your group plan. You want to end any withholdings such as child support or other garnishments. Sometimes it's helpful to conduct an exit interview. That's kind of where we learn what we need to know about our organization. Maybe there's some gaps that we need to address. So we want to make sure that, if we can get any feedback of why people are leaving, sometimes it helps us to tighten up a few things in our organization or find out what we're doing that's great so we can do more of it. And any challenges or areas for growth, we can address that as well. You always want to update your payroll records so that you have a solid end date. Hopefully there's a resignation note if they're leaving, or a termination letter that outlines their final payment, their last day of work, so that that can be on record as well. And then you also want to notify employees who is no longer with the organization so that they can stop sharing pertinent information about the business with that individual. And they know, what they need to do going forward. And there may be some job duties that need to be covered until you replace that person, or you may decide to do some internal reorganization. And then they may apply for unemployment benefits. If you haven't terminated them for cause, they may be eligible for a portion or full unemployment benefits. And so they would file with IDES, and IDES would send you a claim notification that something has been submitted, and then you would just, receive it unless you had an issue with what was in the notice in terms of the information that the claimant provided. There are some free resources on employment law support. So the U.S. Department of Labor's First Step Employment Law Advisor online. There's a website that you can go and ask questions. There's tons of information out there for the employment laws. Then there's also the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, so EEOC.gov. Lots of information there on discrimination, the remedies, the processes, etc. And then you have OSHA's website, OSHA.gov, that has Occupational Safety and Health Administration site information. And then we talked about salaries in order to maintain some level of consistency with the market as well as within our organization. We want to create salary levels that are commensurate with the jobs and the location where we are. And so a lot of job description information and salary information can be found on onetonline.org. And those are all free resources provided by the government for you to use. And so, again, the Greater Englewood Community Development Corporation provides a lot of one-on-one support for job search strategies and resumes through our workforce department, but we also are an Illinois SBDC. And so we provide wraparound services and consulting services for small businesses and entrepreneurs. And so I want you to feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions. And I think there are some in the chat box that we can talk about.
There are. First, lots of, this is a great presentation, excellent presentation, very informative. Visual slides are great. Lots of that happening, so that's great to hear. There is a question: who do I contact to let them know that an employee has quit? He had a child support wage assignment.
And so we would work with IDES on that. And then the agency that sent the withholding notice, we would contact them to let them know that the employee was no longer present and give them the date of termination.
Great. Next question concerning IDES. If an employee was terminated for breaking company policy and they are now claiming unemployment, does the employer need to go somewhere to appeal? Is there any support for employers?
Yes. So once an employee files for IDES, you will get a notice that basically has their statement on there, but there will also be a space for you to write any notes. So if an employee, let's just say an employee submitted for unemployment and said they were fired for no reason, and then you get the notice and you said, well, I haven't seen them for 4 days. They just abandoned their job. You would put that in the comments. The employee was not fired. They resigned because they didn't call or show up for 3 days. And that's the standard of waiting for someone to show up to work. So there's a space on that claim letter for you to put any differing information, or to file an appeal.
Okay, great. Is the employer required to provide recommendation for past employee for potential new employer, especially if the employee did not leave in good standings?
No, you are never required to provide anything to anybody when they leave. The only thing that you would do is employment verification, and you would give their job title, their dates of employment, and you don't even give their salary anymore. So that's all you really have to give. You are not obligated to write recommendation letters at all, and not advise against it.
Do you need to have written proof?
Do you need to have written proof for?
It was a follow-up question.
Oh, for IDEs.
Maybe, yes.
How's it going?
For IDEs, written proof. If you have any documentation, that's great. But that's going to be very difficult if you don't have any, if you don't have written documentation. But if someone, the example that I gave, if someone doesn't show up, there are no call, no show, you've called them, they haven't returned your calls and they haven't shown up to work, and you send a letter to their home saying, we accept your resignation, and by way of you not showing up to work or returning or providing any information, you've resigned. You have that as evidence that you can submit with your appeal form to IDEs to let them know, hey, we tried to reach out to this person. Here's the documentation that we sent them. And then, let them take it from there. They will likely either settle the matter there or advise you to come in to see an administrative judge so that you can talk through that, and you would meet face-to-face or virtually face-to-face with the former employee to discuss what happened, and the judge would hear both sides and then make a determination.
Great. Next question. If an employee took an FMLA, can they file for unemployment after it is over and they are not still able to come back to work after the FMLA period is over?
Well, there's two things there. There's FMLA, which is a protected leave. Once the leave is over, now you're talking about wage replacement. If I'm understanding the question correctly. And so there's other things that they can do. They can file for unemployment if they're not employed. If they are employed, there still may be a reduction of hours, but their job is no longer protected under FMLA. So again, you have, some decisions to make in terms of, can you afford to run your business and not have the position filled? So those are things you have to think about. Or do you have to hire someone temporarily to fill that position? But they can apply for unemployment for a reduction of hours, but I'm not sure whether they would get it or not, because I don't know what their physical whatever is that would keep them out on FMLA. So if they were providing you with continued doctor's notes and things like that, you would have something to base your decision on that says, okay, their FMLA expired, but they're still unable to do the duties of their job because the doctor said so. And if there's no modified duty or anything like that, they may have to apply for unemployment because they don't have any income coming in. But from the employer's perspective, you would need a little bit more information to determine whether or not you just terminate them, you fill their position temporarily. Like there has to be some communication between the employer and the employee to determine when is your return to work date scheduled? Is there a return to work date? All of those things so that you can make a informed decision that's best for you and the employee.
Great, thanks. If I want to hire, if I want to hire students from the university that need field-based work at my organization, what forms do I need to complete?
So they may have some forms, and is it an internship or is it a straight employment relationship? Those are the the conversations you would have with the university, because they may have an externship program in which they would give you all the forms to hire those individuals or to have them included if it's a externship, which can be paid, or if it's an internship or anything like that. So they will have parameters around that. If the college doesn't have parameters, I would bring them in as employees, temporary employees, and then, go from there. But there still has to be, if they need the field experience, they're going to have something written up for their program. So I would find out either from the student or the school what the write-up requirements would be at the end. So at the beginning what you need to provide for that student, for the college, and going forward before you actually start it. So there's no surprises during the process.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
We'll give everyone another minute or so to put their questions in. We're running close to time, so I just want to make sure we could try to get one or two more in. Lots of thank yous. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Lots and lots of that. You might want to scroll through the chat. There's great job. Awesome presentation.
Thank you so much.
I do not see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So I want to thank you so much for awesome presentation. See, wonderful, fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So we really appreciate your taking your time out and educating these great entrepreneurs. And I want to thank everyone for attending, and have a great and safe weekend, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.